So in this video, we're going to actually use a API on a web page. And what we're going to do is we're linking to a site that will, when we send a request to that site, is going to generate random dog videos for us. So I appreciate, well, this may not be as valuable as perhaps live rocket launch data, but it's a simple API for us to get started with, so it's a great start. So if I go to, this is where that information is coming from, dog CEO, and I click on dog API, what we're going to see is, and again, this is a very simple version of what an API can do, but here is the API request. So if I send this API request to dog API server, I'm going to get back a very simple JSON file for us to work with that has a message, which is the image, and then it also has another piece of data, success, if we wanted to play with an object, for example. So in other words, if I click, just for an example, it says if I click on fetch, it gives us an idea of what's getting returned. Here's the JSON that's getting returned. That's presumably the file name of this piece, this random image that looks like a butterfly. I guess they call those butterfly dogs. Anyway, not important. So the other side to that then is if I copy that URL and I send it as an HTTP request to a page, then I'm going to get this is the JSON. There's the raw version of the JSON where the browser's not trying to fix it up for me. So this is the data that we're going to be receiving, and we're going to send this request via our program. We're going to receive our JSON string. We're going to parse it out into a JSON object and display that on the page. And then to the user, it looks like no big deal. And behind the scenes are like, wow, that took a lot of work. So let's jump into making all that happen. All right, so we're going to jump into the code to create that interaction between using our API and our personal web page. I'm currently on MDM Web Docs, which is the folks over at Firefox who make Firefox. This is documentation that they provide for web developers, so it's a fantastic reference. I would encourage you to get comfortable in this site or to play around with it. There's lots of information on anything that has to do with web development, which kind of clues you in if you look at the home page. But I'm going to jump over to something called XMLHttp request, because this is what we're going to use to send our request information back and forth between with utilizing our dog API. And if you read the documentation, it's going to let you know that this is an object that allows us to interact with servers. It'll allow us to retrieve data from a URL. That sounds like a candidate we've already been playing with, without having to do a full page refresh. So in other words, when we get the information back from the server, we don't have to refresh our page in order to update our DOM. That sounds very JavaScripty, doesn't it? Despite its name, XMLHttp request can be used any type of data. In the old days, instead of using JSON, we used something called XML, which is kind of being replaced, not kind of, very much being replaced by JSON. So we're actually getting a JSON HTTP request, but this has been around for a long time, so we still use the object XML HTTP request as the name. So even though we're getting JSON data, XML is just an old type of data that we used to use. So it turns out that there's a constructor, and so we're going to utilize the constructor to initialize a new object. And once we initialize that new object, that new XML HTTP request object, then we have access to properties and methods that we'll be able to use. So if you want, this is a good good reference, good documentation. So when you say, well, how's she getting all of these things? Well, I just happened to look it up in the documentation. So anyway, that's where I'm getting this information. That's a great resource. So I've already started on some of the code. And I'll explain what I've done here. So I have a dog HTML page, and I created a script tag, and inside my script tag is my JavaScript. So I created a new variable called HTTP request, which is just a variable name. It can be whatever you want it to be. Remember, we saw that it was a constructor, so I'm creating a new instance from that XML HTTP request object. So the constructor there, I didn't have to send any information into that constructor. So by utilizing this syntax, I now have a new HTTP request object that I can use its methods and properties. So on line 16 then, I'm utilizing the open method that has been provided to me through this object. And the first argument it needs is what type of request are you sending? Are you sending a GET request, or are you sending a POST request? And for the most part, we're going to be dealing with just GET requests. So I have to put it in quotations. I'm sending a GET request. And this is the URL that I need to send as my API to get the data that I'm interested in. So that would be synonymous. This line is synonymous with us taking this URL, which is what we were told we need for the API call. So I'm just copying that URL and I'm putting it into the address bar. That's all I've done on line 16. I've created a GET request and then I put it into the address bar, but I haven't actually hit the enter key yet, which is what line 17 does. So if I hit the enter key, I'm sending that request to the dog server. Well, in this case, I've got a request back already, a response back already, but we don't have a response back yet in line 17. All we've done is send that data via the URL, via a GET request with this send method. All right, so now we have to handle the fact that we want data back. So here we sent the request, and now we have to take care of the other end of things where we want to receive the data back. So once that request has been sent, we wait for a response. And there's a couple of things that XML HTTP request object is going to be aware of or waiting for or needs to know about. We call this ready state change, is the screen on the left. And there's 5 different states of that request that got sent out. And you can read what they are. The request not initialized yet, the server waiting for a connection, request was received, processing the request, and so forth. And so finally, these are different stages of that request being sent and received back. And obviously the best one is the 4th one, where we finally got the request back and we also received the response from the server. So this is sort of a shaking of the hands. We're all finished. The request was received and something was sent back to you. So that XML HTTP request object is going to be paying attention to all of these different ready state changes. If you have a slow internet connection or that server is busy, it might take more time and to receive to be able to speak. It might take more time to receive these different stages of our request. And so sometimes you might see a wheel that is spinning, like a little icon with a spinning wheel. And so that is waiting for that request to come back. And so at different stages, a programmer might want to do different things to give the user some more response. So maybe while we are on ready state change 0 to 3, make that little spinning wheel show up until we actually get 4. So in our case, we're just going to be concerned about the ready state 4, where we received that data back, that all of these stages have already bypassed and that we've received the data back. But we need to know that the object is paying attention to these different ready state changes. But we only care about this 4th one. The other thing that we need to be concerned about is, all right, so we received a request from the server, but what was the status of that request? In other words, we don't want to try and be showing, let's say, moved permanently. Let's say we got a 301 status back. We're waiting for a dog picture, but the site got moved. And so the server sent us back a 301 status. And then we try to put that image onto our page. But you can see pretty quickly that we're going to get a JavaScript error because we didn't get an image that we expected. So there's 2 things then we need to pay attention to. We need to pay attention to, did we get a good status back from our server, or did we get another status code back that we really don't want to deal with? So we're going to be checking for 2 things before we try to update our DOM with our dog image. First, we want to make sure that we did receive the response back from the server, and that we received that the server says everything's a-okay, I found the page, here's the image, and I've sent you the image or the data, in our case the image that you've requested. So this is what we need to deal with, and that's what we're going to deal with in our code. All right, so the next line of code then is, again, I'm going to copy and paste. We're waiting for a response from the server. So we've sent the request, and now that's not where I wanted to paste that. We're going to paste it here. All right, so now what I'm doing is I have to catch all those ready state changes that we just talked about, those state changes. So what's going to happen is on every time my HTTP request, it's listening for something to come back from the server. So every time we see that different state change, 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, I'm going to run a function, and I'm going to create that function. So let's just go ahead and do that. So I'm going to call it function, and I said it was going to be a function. It can be whatever you want it to be, but that's just my clever naming that I'm creating a function. So the idea here is every time one of those ready state changes, 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, each time those changes, the HTTP request senses a change, it's going to run this function. So the only time I really care about anything finally happening on my DOM is when we got that ready state change number 4. So I'm going to create an if statement that says if that HTTP request ready state change is equal to 4, then do something. So we're going to use that property ready state. So it could be 0. If it's 0 through 3, I might display a spinning wheel, like document get element by ID, picture, spinning wheel, or something along those lines. But what I'm doing right now is all I care about is that ready state 4. And then the other thing I told you I also want to pay attention to is that the status came back 200. So I'm also going to add that to my condition here. So when the HTTP request state is 4, ready state is 4, and the request status is 200, then we're going to update our DOM, because at this point we know we've gotten a valid, in this case, because we're using the dog API, the data that we got back is valid, the server found it, we're ready to go, and so now we can update our DOM with that picture. We've got the data. All right. So here's how we're going to do that. First thing I'm going to do is I need to get the data that was returned from the HTTP request, and we use that with response.txt. So if we're not sure what that's doing, let's just do this, console.log dogs. All right, so let's bring up that page. All right, so I have my page here on the left-hand side. I don't have any information, so the fact that it's blank makes sense. So I'm going to refresh that page. I'm going to look and expect element, and let's see what we've got. So what came back then was console.log dog. So I got the data back from the dog site. I grabbed the response text, and I put that into dogs. So what's that response text? Well, the response text is my JSON. So let's see, I had a husky in this picture. Let's see what I have this time. So you can see that it's changing. So my request is currently working. And in fact, I should be able to look in network and see those responses also changing. So that's a good place to go to make sure that you're getting data back from your API. So looks good. I'm getting data back from my API and I'm console logging it. It looks like a JSON file. And in fact, let's do this. Let's do type of, like we saw in another video, and see what we're told is the data that we're getting back. So we're getting a string back. So if you recall, we are getting a string, a JSON data back, which in fact is a string, and we need to change that string into a JSON object so that we can get at the different pieces of the data. So we're going to use that parse method that we used before, and I'm just going to paste that code in here for you. So remember we did JSON parse, and we took that JSON string, and now we should be converting that into a JSON object. So let's see if that's in fact what happens here. So when I hit refresh, I am getting an object back now. So my object has a message, and it looks like my message might be looks like a URL that I might be able to use as a source. And then it's also got status. So now it's just a matter of updating our DOM. So I think to make my life easy, I'm going to do we'll do an image tag. I'll give it an ID. I don't know what the source is because I'm going to be getting that from my API. So I'll just leave all this blank for the moment. I'm going to give it an ID equal to pic. And so now I should be able to do, let's see, document get element by ID, pick, change the source equal to what I got back. So I got back dogs obj, and then I had message, I believe. Message is my URL, so let's put in message and see what happens. So now I should be able to refresh my page. I get a large dog back there, but we can keep going. I think you're getting the idea. Let's make this bigger so we can see our actual dogs. You can see that this is changing, and there we go. So might put a size on it. There's a dog, there's a dog, there's a dog. So now we are getting live data from our dog API, and we have successfully, yay, we have successfully, through using our HTTP request, XML HTTP request object, we created our request, we sent the request, we waited on the response for the appropriate ready state change, that we only wanted it once the server was complete. And not only was the server saying, okay, I've got what you needed, but I found what you needed. So then we got the response text, which was that JSON string. We verified that it was a string. We converted it to a JSON object so that we could get at pieces of that object and utilize it. In this case, we took the message which provided the URL for our source of our image. That was a lot. So imagine that this is an easy API, and we've got some more challenging APIs to deal with upcoming. So hopefully this is all making sense.